everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Strange Encounters Down Under. Now, I know some of you are waiting for our part 2 episode of the dark side of ufology, and it is in the pipeline. But in this episode, Damien and I are back on the UFO trail, looking at UFOs during wartime and with military involvement. So stay with us as we don our tinfoil hats and dig deeper into the mystery as to why UFOs appear around armed conflict in our war-torn skies and why they are so interested in our military involvement. UFOs are well documented in times of armed conflict and has reached as far back as 312 AD, when seen by Roman Emperor Constantine I when leading his troops to battle in 312 AD, as I just said. But Chinese history tells of soldiers soaring through the skies in fantastic airships, using fire-breathing dragons as their wingmen. But, you know, there's been reports of giant aerial machines big enough to be flying cities in ancient scripts of India. But we also have them appearing in more modern times. And Damien, UFOs were reported flying over Normandy on D-Day and dubbed Foo Fighters by World War II pilots. And they plagued the skies during the Vietnam War. And I guess reports continue to pour in with them being seen darting over the battlefields of the Middle East and other places of conflict. I know you've got a few stories that you wanted to talk about. So why don't you just kick it off with, why don't we just talk about Foo Fighters to start with?
Yeah, that's a great start to the topic. And anybody who's done any sort of like dive into the UFO phenomenon will find out that that's a very big part of the entire subject. It was one of the first times when our own pilots and pilots of the Axis and also pilots of the Allies were seeing and witnessing a strange phenomenon, balls of light hanging off their wingtips, following the aeroplanes, doing incredible things in the sky back when, we thought that it may have been some other country's secret weapon, or it may have been and the other countries were thinking that it was the Allies' secret weapon. So it's a very interesting topic. And it started from an actual comic, a book called where a gentleman was named Foo, and he used to fight fire, and he didn't know how to spell fire, so he'd call it Foo, and he was a Foo fighter. So it was a comedy kind of comic. And a lot of the pilots, when they were seeing these things, would go into the office and say, "What's this damn Foo fighter? What's it go? What's happening?" Because it was quite big at the time amongst the pilots reading these things. And so it stuck, and it became a big part of the UFO phenomenon from there on in.
Yeah, and actually I remember as a kid walking the streets of Brisbane with my grandmother, and we would see Foo was here, those sorts of things, or Foo this way with arrows. It was quite comical. But not for the people involved at the time, of course, the pilot, that is. And I've got an account here, which is one during World War II, when actually in 1942, comes from a Flight Lieutenant Roman Zabinski, who's a member of the Polish division attached to the RAF. Anyway, Zabinski was flying off the coast of Holland, returning home from a bombing mission over Germany, when a disc-shaped luminous object approached the plane from behind. And even though it was several miles from them, it still looked larger than the moon. So that's huge, really huge.
That's pretty big.
Yeah. So they assumed it was some type of enemy aircraft. So Zabinski ordered that the rear gunner open fire as soon as it was in range. Gosh, how many times have we heard that story? And when it was just 200 yards from their plane, the gunner did just that and fired both tracer and standard machine gun rounds at it for 2 minutes with no effect. You'd think after a while you give up, which of course is what they did. But what was happening?
This is another thing that repeats too with the phenomenon, firing rounds at it, which have no effect whatsoever.
Yeah. So the rounds that they were firing mysteriously disappeared when they hit the disc. And the object moved ahead of the aircraft, kept pace with it, which we hear a lot as well, with UFOs keeping pace with vehicles on the ground, planes in the air, etc. but while the gunners continued to shoot at it. Eventually, they gave up and the UFO shot straight up at tremendous speed and disappeared. And again, that's another element that we hear repeated over and over as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The same characteristics time and time again throughout history, whether it be through with military pilots reporting it, civilian pilots, people on the ground. Like you said, you touched on a very important point. They tend to mimic fighters. They tend to mimic our planes. If our planes move in a certain way, the UFOs will follow them. They are highly aware of us, obviously. It's almost like a game of cat and mouse sometimes. It goes back into the high strangeness side of the topic where they seem to act like children sometimes. They're very playful almost with our planes in the sky, with the maneuvers they do. We see it as dangerous because anything in our skies that could potentially hit an aeroplane, and cause an aeroplane to fall out of the sky and kill, untold amount of people, it's very dangerous. So we need to know what's going on in our skies. So when you have these things hanging off your wingtips, but the thing is, and another thing that links it all together too, is that there never has really been crashes or one of these Foo Fighters that has hit an aeroplane accidentally or anything like that and sent it flying out of the sky. Sure, we've shot at them before and we've chased them, and then until that we can't chase them anymore, and then we fall out of the sky, whatever the case. But we can never seem to, one, hit them, two, keep up with them. And the characteristics are all the same. It's like I said, whether it's military or civilian, they tend to do the same things to all of us. So but it tends to happen during times of war a lot more than in regular times, and they tend to come in higher numbers for whatever that reason is. So that's speculation at the moment, but I mean, like I've said in the past, I believe that if we were a creation or of some type of creation, they'd want to be keeping an eye on us and keeping an eye on our development, whether that be technological, our social development, all that kind of stuff. And so it would make sense that they would watch us and keep an eye on us. And the same could be said if these things are time travelers or us from the future or whatever, like some people say, it would make kind of sense in a way that they'd come back and watch our planes and watch massive times of turbulence in human history where maybe it's some kind of like future time travel trip. You pay a certain amount of money, you get to come back in time for a while, watch some aeroplanes, watch some wartime, then fly back again. Same can be said as well, big sporting events. Things like this, these things have appeared at time and time again. They've appeared over fireworks, things like this. So there's an interest, an inherent interest in a lot of the things that we do, especially things we do that have colors coming off them, like fireworks and like airplane lights and stuff like that. So that they have an interest in, and bombs exploding and stuff like that, during wartime. And that they right now in Ukraine, there was an article that came out about 6 months ago where a lot of the astronomers in Ukraine were seeing a lot of these UFOs in the sky doing incredible maneuvers. And I mean, during wartime, as you know, I mean, we have a lot of things that could be misconstrued as UFOs, such as missile dense drones. At the moment, we don't know how many drones are flying over the Ukraine. Missiles, that kind of thing. So once you rule them out, and it's easy to rule them out in a way because of the maneuvers they make and all this kind of stuff. And if they're picked up on radar, changing direction at sudden speed, to high speed, that kind of thing. So yeah, it is interesting, and we are seeing what we're talking about right now live in Ukraine. They're seeing these things, and like I said, not all of them may be UFOs. Some may be misidentifications, but people are looking up to the sky more now due to the issue, and maybe that's why they're seeing more of these UFOs as well, because people are actually looking up. They're wary about missiles coming down and hitting them and all that kind of stuff. So is that the reason why people are seeing more, just because people are looking up now, or is it because there's a wartime on and they're coming here in higher numbers?
So the reports of the Foo Fighters became very common among US and British air crews, reporting hundreds of sightings of huge cylindrical discs, but also large rockets that were described as being able to turn on American dime or Australian 50-cent piece or 10-cent piece, or gigantic cigar-shaped objects complete with portholes. So it wasn't just these small objects that I've seen photographs of on the internet where they're sort of wispy and almost transparent. There were other more nuts and bolts UFOs seen at the same time too. So I think that's really interesting, and it makes me wonder, and maybe you've got some thoughts on this, as to the more wispy ones, maybe they're the alien version of some sort of probe being able to get closer to our aircraft. What do you think?
Yeah, I do believe that a lot of the characteristics of certain what we call Foo Fighters are basically the same as the spherical UFOs that are reported in 80 something% of cases, and I do believe that they may be some kind of drone of some type that is sent down from a larger object. I mean, I have seen and witnessed and filmed larger balls of light spitting out or excreting smaller balls of light into the sky, which then go off and disappear into different directions. So to me, that looks like some kind of drone release kind of thing where they're observing. And that would make sense too, because it would make a lot more sense to send down a smaller ball of light to follow an airplane than some huge ball of light that would freak the pilot out completely, and or some huge spaceship, so it would make sense. Like we would do the same thing, and we do it in wartime. We send drones out from helicopters, from balloons. There's all types of projects we're involved in. So yeah, there's a good chance that a lot of these things can get close to airplanes because they don't affect the air around them. I mean, they don't affect the atmosphere around them apart from maybe giving off a glow. But they don't actually, they have their own atmosphere in them, seemingly, these balls of light or these UFOs, and they can do whatever they want. So they're not going to, sitting on a plane's wingtip, they're not going to affect the plane in any way, shape, or form, unless it's some sort of side effect from the energy that the UFO is giving off, or whatever the case is. But yeah, they could be drones of some type. Who really knows?
Yeah, well, actually, I've got a case that's from 1943 over the city of Stuttgart, where two crews reported seeing hundreds of silver discs, the size of the American $half or the Australian 50-cent piece, floating slowly down from the sky above it in a tight cluster. And the cluster was reported to be 23 meters long and 6 meters wide. And some of those mysterious discs were reported to land on the wing of one of the B-17 planes, and it started at burning. But that plane never made it back from the raid, so it could never be verified. Now, they did find out that there were no enemy planes above or near the American bombers at the time. So the question then becomes, well, where did those mysterious silver small discs come from?
Yeah, well, exactly. That, there's a plethora of sightings that were seen during the World Wars and whatnot. They're checking us out. They're, observing what we're doing. But the funny thing is that, and what I found amazing too, that straight away, even though a lot of pilots who saw these things assumed that they were, top secret creations of the Germans, and the Germans actually thought that they were the Americans and the, some sort of top secret. But it wasn't until after wartime, as you know, they realized that, hey, once everything got released and top secret information was released, the Germans weren't up to that standard, even though they were highly technologically advanced at the time compared to other armies around the world. They weren't quite up to the standards of being able to do what we've seen in the sky these UFOs do. I mean, we've heard of the Glock and other German inventions that are supposedly centered around time travel or UFO travel. There's conspiracies out there that the Germans invented their own UFOs, and all this is unproven. And I think a lot of it has gotten out there in the day to maybe put fear into people, into other nations, that the Germans may have something that's scary that could shut us down, and that's what a lot of people believe. But it turns out that it wasn't until the end of the war that they realized, hey, no, this wasn't you guys. This wasn't you guys. So who the hell was these things? And we're still seeing them till this day, till this very day.
Yeah. And the things that they reported seeing, I mean, people have seen those through, history, haven't they? I was reading that at D-Day at Normandy, there were reports of pulsing red fireballs, noiseless rocket-shaped objects, metallic egg-shaped objects, circular luminous objects, and they're pacing planes for up to an hour. And even planes suddenly being bathed in light. Now we hear those sorts of descriptions today. So and obviously they've got much more much easier maneuverability in the air than what we do. And that's why it's actually a safety issue for pilots when these things are around them. But UFOs weren't just seen during wartime, and we will come back to that. But you were saying to me previously that obviously they continued afterwards, and you wanted to talk about the 1952 case, was it, over in the States?
Yeah, well, 1952, Washington, D.C., a pilot started seeing, civilian pilots started seeing, and also military pilots were seeing strange balls of light, all sorts of different phenomena in the sky for a very short period of time. So there was a massive flap happening. And, this is after the World War II had finished, not long after. And so there was still a little bit of fear in people that something could be happening again or starting again. And so there was a massive public interest in what they were seeing. And so it kind of forced the Air Force to go into the largest ever at that time. The previous largest public press conference was during World War II. And so this was the largest one since World War II, just to calm the public's interest and to quell the public's interest in it. And basically they tried to explain it away as temperature inversions and the typical things, like, which is like a pocket of air which is different to another pocket of air which can pick up radar returns and give off false returns. Basically it's in temperature inversion. And they basically tried to say it was all different types of things, meteorological phenomenon, meteors, that kind of thing, shooting stars even. And the pilots who saw these things knew that wasn't the case. These are trained individuals who spent, some of them, thousands of hours of airtime up in the sky, or flight time, and they've seen many, many things. They know what planets look like. They know what, basically anything they see in the sky looks like. If they didn't, they wouldn't be a good pilot. You wouldn't want them flying you, right? So it's they're used to that. So it's time and time again this has happened, not just during wartime, where where the government has completely shut down all interest and investigation into the topic. And even when the government has looked into it, or the Air Force have looked into the phenomenon, it's been not bipartisan. It has been quite very one-sided, with the idea of rubbishing the phenomenon, getting it away from the public's attention so the public doesn't ask questions. And they've done that over the years, as you know, by rubbishing and ridiculing witnesses to the sightings, including Air Force pilots, their own people who are flying. So that's something that's happened time and time again, within wartime or not. It's no matter what you do, being a pilot, it's either you're rubbished or not. But the good thing is, nowadays everything seems to be changing, and they're actually actively encouraging, with this new Pentagon report coming out, with this new team investigating it. They're actually encouraging reports, and I just read that there is now over 370 something reports from all sorts of pilots that have come out just since the first Pentagon report came out at the beginning of last year, or a couple of years ago. And so now there's been over 300, which is more combined than in the previous 17 years of pilot reports. So the stigma is being lifted finally. And so people are feeling free to actually talk about what they're seeing in the sky. So just imagine how many pilots during wartime didn't speak about this, and how many civilian pilots during regular time have not spoken about this when we're not in war. So it's good now the veil's being lifted a bit. So that's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming back closer to home here in Australia, there was a case I came across which happened in February 1945 with the USS New York, which was sailing near New Guinea off the Admiralty Islands, when their radar picked up a UFO heading its way. And I always like these cases where they have radar picking things up, and preferably multiple types, but
they're the best ones. Yeah, definitely.
But the crew were called to battle stations, and moments later the object was seen hovering directly over the ship. Now, they estimated it was about 4 miles high, and it was during daylight. The UFO was shiny and silver in color and silent. Well, it could be 4 miles high. Around 2,000 sailors and Marines witnessed the UFO, including the captain, plus the crew on the 2 destroyers that were accompanying the New York at the time. Now, the UFO was keeping pace with the 3 ships. And this is the interesting part, which was just barely 12 knots, actually, which wouldn't sustain the flight of a plane to stay aloft. So naturally, the order was to shoot it down. So 2 of the New York's anti-aircraft guns opened fire, hitting the UFO, but again with no effect. As soon as the guns fell silent, the UFO accelerated away at tremendous speed, quickly disappearing. Now, I've read a lot of these cases where, the military opens fire on these UFOs and they don't respond. They just don't respond. They might pace it for a while, but they don't respond to it and they take off. So first of all, they've got confidence that whatever we do is not going to affect their technology. But I guess, do you think that they're sort of, and I think this may be true, but what are your thoughts, that they're observing what our military capability or technological capabilities are, and for some strange reason?
They do seem to be. You hit a good point there, and that's something that's happened time and time again. They've been watching us, observing us, looking at our technology, seeing what we are capable of. And again, it's another good point. No matter what we do, there was the Gorman dogfight with the UFO where it ended up bad for him. The Mantell, where he chased Captain Mantell, where he chased the UFO into the sky and ended up bad for him. He ended up crashing. And then they tried to say it was Venus, that he chased, and then it's another ridiculous, which kind of rubbishes the man's story, his life, the whole kit. And this has happened time and time again. I do think that the whatever they are, and the fact that they're observing us, observing our technology, observing how fast we are, what we can do, if we've cracked the sound barrier yet, if we've cracked, all other barriers of speed or whatever, they're watching everything we do, and that's exactly right. And the speculation that could go into that is phenomenal. Why? Why are they doing this? Why is the constant observance? Why are they appearing during times of conflict all around the globe, going back many hundreds and thousands of years? Like, as with old cases that, some of them may be real. Some reports from ancient battles and stuff speak about flaming shields and things like this. So, a lot about the earlier cases. Some of them can be verified, and some seem to be made up in later times. So, but I do believe that we have been seeing them for a very long time. And if anything that we see today is an indication of earlier times in history, then they've been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah. Another case I wanted to bring, this is an Australian case too, I wanted to bring to the attention of people, was one that happened over Tasmania. And it was the summer of 1942, where an RAAF pilot was flying over Tasmania when he had an encounter with a mysterious object that was shaped like a large airfoil, which is the basic form of wings, fins, or some sort of horizontal stabilizer of most aircraft. It was about 45 meters long and 15 meters wide, and the airfoil tapered to a fin at the rear, and the pilot could see sporadic green-blue flashes emanating from this area. The object itself was a bronze color, and on top there was a dome that seemed to be reflecting flashes of sunlight. And strangely, the pilot thought something might have been inside this dome wearing a helmet, and this was the cause of the reflections. I'm not sure I would have thought that at the time if I was the pilot, but there you go. He's a pilot, I'm not. But anyway, the object kept pace with the Australian plane for a few minutes before suddenly turning away. And from this angle, the pilot could see 4 fins on the object's underside, which then quickly accelerated to a tremendous speed. And according to the pilot, it dove straight into the ocean. Now, this created a massive whirlpool as it quickly disappeared below. And I think that's really interesting, that because I've received reports from people from places like off the coast of Brisbane, out past Stradbroke Island, off Redcliffe Coast, which is just north of Brisbane, but where people had seen UFOs rising out of the water and going down into the water, but with barely any disturbance of the water itself. Yet this one created a massive whirlpool.
Yeah, it's very unusual. Like, I think if you look into the description of what you just said about the craft and how it looked like, it seemed different than most other type of regular UFOs. So, there's a thing that people say, what's with all the different UFOs? Because there's so many different types, as you know, that are reported around the world. It's not just balls of light, even though they make up the high percentage. I think a lot of the clue for what you mentioned, how it left a little bit of a wake or whirlpool in the water. It seems different than most UFOs. I've filmed them and seen them myself flying into the water at high speeds at strange angles without any splash whatsoever, any interference on the water. The same thing's been reported by the Pentagon pilots who witnessed the Tic Tac go into the water without any splashing or anything like that, rising out of the water. Same sort of deal. Without affecting the environment around them, and that's so they seem to be able to do this in the sky, in space, and also in our oceans, and not only our oceans but our Earth as well. They've been seen flying into mountains as well as rivers and lakes and oceans. So there's a whole plethora of places these things can be. And I've said many times in the past that I don't believe that they're coming just from other planets and from other space. I believe they're here right now and all the time. And they're in our Earth, they're in our oceans. If you look at a lot of ancient beliefs, that they come from under the earth. And special people, ant people that came up and taught ancients, certain knowledge and stuff like that. So there is something strange about the belief system that's built up behind the phenomena. But when I say strange, it's something that's very similar throughout history, and whether it's wartime or regular time. But the thing is, when are humans not at war at some point? We're always at war. There's always there's an Afghanistan, or there's an Iraq, or there's a World War II, Korea, there's the Boer War, there's World War One. Everything, it just doesn't stop. Humans are constantly at war with each other. And we might have a small break in time when we're not at war, but then there's a different type of war, like a cold war between countries, so I think we'd be a fascinating race for any any intelligent species that are coming from. When I say intelligent, that's a human concept of intelligence. So obviously these things are aware, so they do show some form of intelligence. But we would be a fascinating race to observe, like almost like a cosmic Big Brother show, where they're all watching us on this big rock, what we're doing and who we're taking over today and what it's just. But then again, at the same time, it makes you think, why they don't come down and just land in the White House lawn, like what a lot of skeptics say, and say, "Oh, we're here, everyone." Well, there is the zoo hypothesis, right? And other things, reasons why they wouldn't come down. And if anyone who's intelligent would have watched us during wartime, like they have, they'd know we're a very violent species and to keep the hell away from us, because we're more than likely, the way we treat beings, humans on the earth, let alone other animals that are different to us, leaves a lot to be desired. So anyone who's seen this would go, okay, I'm not going anywhere near these crazy ant-like humans. They cannibalize each other. They're likely to cannibalize us in some way or to try and destroy us. And we're very warlike, and we always have been. And it's would be a very strange but fun show for some extraterrestrial race to come down and watch us. And that could be what's happening. We don't really know.
We don't. But I want to get back to the Vietnam War, because one of the most unusual UFO incidents that took place there was in 1966 at the height of the Vietnam conflict near a place called Nha Trang. And this case involves, it happened one evening when a large group of soldiers were getting ready to watch an outdoor movie, when the sky around the military base suddenly turned extremely bright. And the troops were used to seeing flares lit off over a hill near the base. So at first they thought nothing of it. But the light didn't go away, and they soon came to realize that this wasn't the light from flares. And what happened was a large luminous object was seen hovering high over the base, and as it was, the bulldozers were clearing the land, the 2 Skyraider planes warming up, and the generator used to power the movie projector all stopped suddenly, or suddenly stopped working. There wasn't a car, a truck, a plane, or anything running for about 4 minutes. And then the UFO then suddenly dropped straight down over the troop and stopped in midair only about 500 feet above the crowd underneath. But by this time, the entire valley was lit up. And then, just as suddenly, the UFO shot straight up and out of sight. And I wanted to bring this to people's attention because we often hear where UFOs will be seen and they will sort of, flash up or flare up, and they will light up the place like daylight. That's what witnesses often say. It lit up the place like daylight. I could see every leaf on the tree, every blade of grass on the ground, but it happened, in the evening. And this is such a common feature of UFOs. And I've always wondered, why on earth would they do that? Is it some sort of, byproduct of their propulsion? What's going on?
That's a brilliant question. That's it is very unusual. That's reported so much, as you know, the bright flashes. And I've seen these. I've actually caught one of these on film, on composite photograph, a bright UFO that flashed over the town here, and then turned out the entire town's power for about 2 minutes. It was incredible. And like you said, the bright flash illuminated all the trees. It became like daytime. It illuminated all the homes around the area, the rooftops, you name it. No one could explain it. And it was accompanied by a massive bang as well. That's another thing with some of these UFOs that flare up. A huge bang is sometimes heard just before the UFOs are seen. Whether that has something to do with it or not, I'm not sure. But the flasher type UFOs, I mean, I've caught them up in the sky on multiple cameras now, so I know they're real. So I've seen them flash up there, flash down below. So I know that that phenomenon does exist, and a lot of people have seen and reported that over the years. So whether that's a byproduct, as you say, of their propulsion or the energy they give off, who really knows? But it seems to be almost like I had a theory that there's a lot of UFOs cruising around our sky, invisible to the naked eye. But sometimes certain things may happen, like there may be large solar flares that come down and hit the Earth's magnetosphere, which enables them to be seen for a second or so. That's a possibility. That's why they're giving off the flash. Maybe it's to say, hey, humans, we're here. Here's something to remember us by. Bright flash, blind you all for a while, and then we're heading off. Who really knows? But it does seem to be it's either something to do with their propulsion, what they're giving off, or they're doing it on purpose to say, hey, this is something that you'll never forget, and you did see something strange. Or there's a theory too that could be a radiation they're giving off as well before they take off. Maybe it's something to do with their power system when they're powering up and the flash happens, and then they're able to take off at high speeds because the flash is normally reported before they take off, which is pretty bizarre. Or when they're up high in the sky. So yeah, that's another one of those questions that we don't quite have the answer, but you can speculate, until the cows come home. So what's going on with it?
I know. And there was a case that happened in the 70s. It was in Western Queensland, in Charleville, I think it was, where a group of young men, late teenage years, were up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they saw this object going across the sky like this, just slowly, and then it dropped to the ground, and as it did, there was a bright green flash of light which lit up the whole place like daylight, except it was green sunlight, he said. And there was more to that story because it actually came down. The young guys got in the car, went out to that area, and police were already there and told them to chuff off. But they came back later and they saw that because when they went there the first time, they saw there was a big circular marking on the ground. But when they came back after the police left, they could see that it had actually been graded. So there's a big story to that one, which I've told in previous episodes. But I also wonder whether it's some sort of bioresonance for scanning, like could they be identifying people in certain areas through that bioresonance? I mean, we've got to sort of start thinking outside the box, don't we, as to
Yeah.
what this is. We can't just sort of, well, we've just got to think outside the box. We can't go outside our human mind, but whatever else is out there, yeah, I
Well,
think we need to
yeah,
consider
I
it.
think you're right. I think we need to think outside the box. It's very important. We're stuck with our own preconceived notions of science, and we're stuck with our own preconceived notions of what's going on around us. So when something like this happens, it kind of really throws the human mind into having to think out the box, because this is outside the box. Our box says you can't do certain things within the realm of science. You can't travel the faster than the speed of light. You can't do this. You can't do that, but we really have no idea. It's our laws of physics, not the universe's laws of physics. And I think Tesla was onto it a lot more, especially when you're speaking with stuff about resonance with the Great Pyramid and other things. Like certain individuals have been onto other possible energies or energy sources, levitation, all this kind of stuff that these ancients apparently knew about. Or, if you go into the whole Egyptian thing and see some of the construction that has taken place and some of the core holes and strange things, ancient technologies, who knows what they knew. And I mean, the Sumerians, as you know, spoke about certain extraterrestrials giving them knowledge, coming down from certain planets and doing all sorts of things like that. So I mean, yeah, it is unusual, and it is it may be there's another thought too, when it comes to the flashes, that they may be like, if you look at it now, I'm looking at it back in a human sense. They give off this bright flash. Now, who's to say? You mentioned something about some sort of scanning or something like this. Now, that's a good one, because I've thought about that too. What if they're scanning the area by taking some sort of 3D image of the entire area? It's that kind of thing. Is
Yeah.
that what they're doing? And again, I mean, it's all speculation. We don't really
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it could also be some form of LIDAR where they're looking for minerals, as well, because
Absolutely.
I mean, I think planet Earth is a huge repository for minerals, a great resource. So if you want minerals, come here and, look for where you can beam them out. I
That's
don't know.
right. And also this is an advertisement for us humans here. If you want a human to probe and check out, we're all here. We're all guinea pigs, like we always have been. So yeah, come on down. No,
No,
I'm
thank
joking.
you.
Yeah, no, thanks. You don't want that. But no, I find it fascinating. And one of the earlier cases too, involving wartime, which I found quite fascinating over the years, is the Battle of LA back in
Mm.
1942. There was a lot of pre-war issues. They thought it was the Japanese coming over, sending these big dirigibles or whatever the case is. But for a long time, and there was like hundreds and hundreds of rounds fired at this object that was picked up on radar, and it moved very slowly, and it stopped and hovered. And they tried to shoot this thing down, and they were hitting it, and the rounds were exploding all around it without any effect whatsoever. And I mean, it's quite fascinating. And there are some conflicting reports, but if you speak to any of the surviving witnesses from the event who are still around, they'll tell you that no, this thing was up there for ages. It was strange. There was other light phenomenon reported that night as well. But then again, like with wartime, how do we know what's because a lot of people looking up to the sky, scared and panicked, right? So they're worried about they're going to see everything. They're going to be worried about missiles coming down, all this kind of stuff. So are they seeing actual UFOs or some UFOs, and the rest is wartime jitters, and they're seeing, side effects from missiles going off or this or that, or missiles streaming through the sky? Same as now in Ukraine. How do we know that a lot of what they're seeing isn't UFOs and is just wartime objects in the sky, drones and missiles and stuff? It's scary, but it's one of the earlier cases where involving UFOs in wartime, where
Yeah.
everyone was highly anxious. We're worried about war with Germany and Japan and everything. And, so anything
Yeah.
like that to happen, I mean, they sent the entire town into a blackout on purpose. And then were firing at this thing, no effect whatsoever. And then eventually it just took off and went down the coast. And some say it went into the ocean, and some say it just disappeared. No one knows what happened. But yeah, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah. And I think you've actually touched on a really good point there, Damien, that, during times of conflict, war times, and trouble times too. I mean, we are certainly living in the times of the troubles right now. But, you know, I do wonder, I'm going to open up another door here, how the angst of the collective at the time could actually possibly be projecting something as well, some sort of psychic projection. And I know Carl Jung, he wrote a book called about flying saucers in the title anyway, I can't quite remember, but he actually explored this idea that he said originally he thought that UFOs were some sort of psychic projection caused exactly by this. At the end of the book, I remember reading, he said, well, he couldn't explain how that could be picked up on radar, but just because he doesn't explain it doesn't mean, you know, it can't be explained. And I certainly don't think that it's all psychic projection, but I do think in some cases, I wonder if it could be.
You hit on a really good point there. And I think you could be right. I've thought that if society, you know, we'd have no idea about the energies we give off as human beings, emotional energy, all that kind of stuff, our connection with other humans. There's a lot. If you go down that route, it could be a spiritual route, whatever the case is, but there are connections and energetic connections with human beings, with nature, with the earth. Everything's alive. And these things do, you made a great point, they do seem to connect with certain individuals' minds. So there may be a mindset thing happening there where you can think something or want something and something appears. And if you want something enough, it'll appear. And if humans are worried about, you know, missiles landing on them and they're scared and paranoid, that'll be a collective mindset, which could be quite powerful. And it is. Humans can feed off other people's negative emotions, positive emotions. And during wartime, there's a lot of negative emotions.
Yeah.
So, and there's that theory that we could be projecting negative emotions out there, creating something that's utterly, utterly bizarre. But like Jung said, he can't understand why there's radar reports. So if we are manifesting phenomenon, or individuals are even manifesting phenomenon, how can that explain that the phenomenon then is filmed on multiple cameras and seen by multiple other people and is picked up on radar as a solid object?
Yeah. Well,
How can the human mind do that? That is another incredible side possibility as well.
and that's a topic for another show, I think.
Yeah, exactly. You could go on about that for a while because
Yeah.
there is the possibilities are endless as to why these things could be here, what they're doing. There's so much speculation, and
Yeah.
I believe it's best always to keep an open mind and not speculate too much because, like you said before, we're looking at it with a human viewpoint, with a human frame of mind, as something that we don't understand, something that's highly anomalous. And so you can actually think, oh, it's this, or this. And a lot of people make money nowadays by stipulating that it's this, it's the Venusians, it's, you know, contact, it's this, it's good aliens, they're here to help us, and all this kind of stuff. So humans are looking for hope. So if you tell humans what they want to hear, we're always, especially about the unknown and about life and about the whole big picture in general. It's scary for most people to think about it, you know, how tiny we are and insignificant we actually are in the entire scheme of things. But we like to make our lives, we like to believe that our lives are significant and have meaning and will continue to have meaning after we leave this earth. And, you know, so a lot of people will fall into the trap of believing individuals who will tell them what they want to hear, but it is always highly imperative and scientific in a way to keep your mind open and keep all available options open and on the table. When
Yeah.
it comes to this phenomenon, because it is highly anomalous and there aren't that many answers, unfortunately, that are
Yeah.
forthcoming anyway.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wanted to wind up with a couple of reports from my end anyway. Just a quote. I remember reading about the Australian Navy destroyer HMAS Hobart, which was involved in the Vietnam War as well. Apparently, just what happened was it was actually shot at, unfortunately, terrible situation actually, that the ship was actually hit by another US warship, and sadly a couple of people died, and there was some sort of confusion, but because at the time lights were seen in the sky, just outside the demilitarized zone of where the Vietnam War was happening. And, you know, there was a lot of report about that at the time, but it was found that there were no enemy helicopters operating near the demilitarized zone at the time. So they could never actually track back as to what the lights initially were that the ships were called in to go on patrol and look for, you know, what the heck they are. But the late General George Brown, who was the commander of the US 7th Air Force at the time of the incident, he was later quoted as saying UFOs plagued us in the Vietnam War. They weren't called UFOs at the time. They were referred to as enemy helicopters. They were only seen at night and only in certain places. The Australian destroyer was hit, but there was no enemy at all involved, but we always reacted. And these things always occurred after dark. And the origin of the mysterious lights that were reported in the area at the time was never, ever determined. So that sort of remains a bit of has a question mark over it, that one. And I do wonder, like, you know, why would they, I mean, it's difficult to know. It's difficult because that was in wartime. There was a lot going on. We don't know exactly what they said that there was no military involvement from the enemy at the time. But, you know, I think Vietnam War was pretty messy and things weren't as well possibly documented as what they or recorded as what they might have thought they had it recorded.
Yeah.
Don't
A
know.
lot of strange things happened during the Vietnam War, and not just UFO related too. I'm sure you've heard of the rock apes that they witnessed. These bipedal looking creatures they described as covered in hair that would stand on two legs, throw rocks at them, and then run off back into the bush, stuff like that. Early reports of Sasquatch kind of phenomenon. And many soldiers reported this. And when they would ask the villagers would speak about these beings and know exactly what the Allied soldiers were talking about. These rock beings. They weren't 7 foot tall, Bigfoot. They were described as quite short, but almost like a possible living Homo florensis or something like that, something that's still continuing to this day. But there was a lot of explained phenomena, including ghost phenomenon reported during a lot of the wars. And like I've said and stipulated a number of times, and I'll be going into in the documentary Haunted Skies a lot, is the connection between when we're having flaps in the sky with UFO phenomenon, we're also getting a lot of reports on the ground of other strange phenomenon, strange beings, strange creatures, strange light phenomenon appearing in people's homes, poltergeist phenomenon, all sorts of. So there's a possible connection with stuff like that. And during wartime, what we're talking about, that people are jittery, they're scared, they're worried, and a lot of people aren't thinking normal, you know. So there's a lot of negativity around, and a lot of strange phenomenon again happening on the ground while it's happening in the sky. And this seems to correlate time and time again when you've got areas of high strangeness or flaps of UFOs. So who knows?
There certainly seems to be a connection between trauma or long periods of duress, which is what all happening during wartime, and where that opens up you know, links to the paranormal for some strange reason. And that sort of brings me back to that whole question of psychic manifestation or projection from human beings. So who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
So many questions.
I know.
So little answers, unfortunately.
Oh, it's a big mystery.
I mean, all you can do is really put the evidence out there. You know, people can make their own minds up about this phenomenon without it being made up for them. I think that many people have a different answer for whatever this is. And at the end of the day, whatever brings you hope and brings you a little bit of understanding to yourself or happiness, believe in what you want to believe. And, you know, belief is a powerful thing, as you know, and the understanding that these things are real is a massive change to the belief system for any person. Especially once you see them and know that this is real, it affects people in different ways, as you know. But it does change everyone's paradigm who sees it, you know, and opens you up to a whole bunch of different things. So it's good to speculate, but don't, and it's good to have an open mind, but don't not so open that your brain falls out your ears. And that happens to a lot of people in this field. Once you're down the rabbit hole, there's no coming back up.
Well, go down the rabbit hole, you may only find bunnies. So there you go.
Well, that's a nice thing to find compared to some of the things out there. So yeah, I'd rather bunnies, that's for sure.
Well, that's a wrap from us, folks. So until next time, we'll be back with another episode in another 2 weeks. And until then, stay safe and bye for now.